If you have your Bibles or your New Testaments with you this morning, I invite you to turn to Matthew's Gospel, chapter 4. There are but a handful of verses that I want to read, which will serve as the basis for our message this morning. Matthew chapter 4, I want to begin reading in verse 18, where Matthew tells us that as Jesus was walking beside the Sea of Galilee, he saw two brothers, Simon, called Peter, and his brother Andrew. They were casting a net into the lake, for they were fishermen. "Come, follow me," Jesus said, "and I will send you out to fish for people." At once they left their nets and followed him. Going on from there, he saw two other brothers, James, son of Zebedee, and his brother John. They were in a boat with their father Zebedee, preparing their nets. Jesus called them, and immediately they left the boat and their father and followed him. Today is June the 1st, 2025. The reason I mentioned that is the significance of that date is because of the fact that this month, this church celebrates 130 years of being in existence. It was June the 16th, 1895, when 6 charter members and 13 other individuals chose to make professions of faith and become baptized together in Linden, Missouri, for the purpose of having an organizational meeting of what would later become LindenBaptist.church. In 1904, land was purchased and the original white frame building was built. Set right across the street. This building, which is now our sanctuary, was completed in 1957. If you move beyond, headed south, an addition and major renovation occurred in 2003, is when we dedicated that. And every year about this time, I can't help but think about where this church has been and where this church is and where this church is going. And each and every year as we remember our past, or as I consider our past, while knowing that we are continually moving forward into the future, I can't help but think we must never lose sight of our purpose as a church. Our purpose of sharing the gospel with the world. Knowing full well that times may change, facilities may change, people may come and go. But the faithfulness of God to those who seek to follow His leadership is something that will remain unchanged forever. Because God is faithful. And Jesus says as much if you turn on over into Matthew chapter 16. Jesus and His disciples are walking, and Jesus asked them a rather poignant question one day. He says, "Who do people say that I am?" You'll remember this exchange. Well, some say you're Elijah, some say you're this prophet, that sort of thing. Jesus allows them to get away with these answers until He makes the decision to ask the most pointed of questions. But He says, "But what about you guys? Who do you say that I am?" And there had to have been a pause. At which point Peter finally speaks up, as Peter often did, by saying, "You're the Christ, the Son of the living God." And it was with those words that Jesus said to him and to the other disciples there, "You're right. And it is upon this rock that I will build my church, and the gates of Hades will not prevail against it." What I learned in that is that the Church of Jesus Christ is here to stay. Now, it's been through a lot. It's been through a lot. And we know that there are indeed times when churches close their doors. Populations change, economics change, whatever. But through it all, the church has remained steadfast. Now, having said that, let me simply say this. The church hasn't always been at its best. Okay? The history of the church is filled with starts and stops. It's filled with bad decisions. It's filled with decisions and actions that are sometimes less than Christian, shall we say. But simply because the church has not always been at its best doesn't mean I don't believe in the church. For I indeed believe in the church. But I believe in the church at its best. And that's what I want to share this morning as we celebrate the 130th anniversary of Linden Baptist Church. The first thing I would say is this. The church is at its best when it accepts people as they are. Okay? The church is at its best when it accepts people as they are. At the 2002 Emmys, Oprah Winfrey received the Bob Hope Humanitarian Award. And in her acceptance speech, she shared a lesson that she had learned from her father about the importance of accepting people as they are in order to help them. In fact, her quote was, "You must begin where they are and seek to understand them." Now you say, well, how did her father teach her that lesson? Well, her father was a barber in Nashville, Tennessee. And down through the years, the barber shop also served as a gathering place for the homeless, for outcasts, for misfits of society. And it seemed that those very same people often found their way around virtually all of the holiday dinner tables in her home. Until she finally got fed up with it. And so, upon one occasion, Oprah asked her father, "Dad, why exactly do these people need to be included in our holiday dinners?" Okay? I mean, why can't we just have some, quote, normal people around our table? And she said her father's answer changed her life. For he looked at her and said simply this, "They are normal. They want the very same things we do. They want to be known, they want to be loved, and they want to be fed." Listen, the church is at its best when it embraces people where they are on their journey. Not where the church wants them to be, or not where the church expects them to be, okay? Or not even where the church thinks they should be. When a baby is born, I've often wondered how many parents go to the nursery in the hospital and ask to examine that baby before deciding whether or not they're going to accept it and take it home. And I've met a lot of parents, new parents, and I don't think I've ever had a new parent say that that's what they did. But here's the thing. Churches don't need to do that either. However, some churches do. You see, there are those churches that impose social, cultural, or theological expectations upon their people before they will accept them. They draw up a list of flaws that they don't possess in order to use them as a litmus test for inclusion and membership. And sometimes these lists may only be implicitly understood, although there are those churches that may actually go so far as to putting them in writing or putting them in print. I'll be honest, I'm just not sure such thing is scriptural. And I've often wondered over the years is how many people have been turned away from the church simply because they were not, quote, normal. I say that because I'm constantly amazed at how Jesus called his disciples. Matthew didn't tell us that Jesus approached each of these four gentlemen and said, hey, tell me about your beliefs. Tell me about your lifestyle. Jesus merely said to these men, follow me. Follow me. You see, Jesus was willing to accept each of them as they were, flaws and all. But nevertheless was willing to invite each of them to join him on the journey of a lifetime. The question then becomes, well, why would Jesus do such a thing? I think Jesus loved them enough that he was willing to teach them the truth about life. I think Jesus loved them enough that he had a confidence in them to learn what it was he was teaching, and trusted God to simply lead them and guide them. You see, churches that are at their best, churches that are healthy, are churches that follow the example and the teachings and the actions of none other than Jesus Christ himself. Because he said, it's upon this rock I will build my church. The tagline at Linden over the years has always been the fact that we're on a journey. Somebody asked me one day, said, well, what kind of journey are you all on? I said, well, it's not an easy journey. I said, but we're trying to learn what it means to love God. We're trying to learn what it means to love our neighbor. And we're trying to invite others who are willing to join us on the journey as we make every effort to become more and more like Jesus Christ. Now, for us to accomplish that, we have to be willing to accept people where they are on their journey, not where we want them to be. And that process begins by welcoming them to the table, by listening to their story, and by walking in their shoes. The church is at its best when it accepts people where they are and as they are. Secondly, I think the church is at its best when it challenges people to live up to their potential. I read the story about President Lincoln, who attended a church service once, and someone asked him if he liked the preacher and whether or not he intended to go back to the church. Lincoln looked at the person asking the question and said, absolutely not. They said, well, why not? Lincoln replied, because the preacher did not challenge me to do anything great for God. Think about that. You know, we don't do anybody a favor when we're willing to simply allow them to underachieve. I'm going to ask you a question. Answer it silently, if you would. Okay. But the question is this: who was your best teacher or coach when you were growing up? Now, don't misunderstand the question. Okay. I didn't ask you who was your favorite teacher or your favorite coach growing up. And the reason I didn't is because if you are like me, I'd be willing to say that your favorite teacher or your favorite coach was the one who challenged you and the one who pushed you. It was the one that wasn't going to accept mediocrity. I'll grant you, they may not have been your favorite teacher, may not have been your favorite coach, but they may very well have been your best teacher or your best coach. I've shared with some the story of how I got into public speaking. Because growing up, I didn't like to speak if there were two people in front of me. Couldn't stand it. Scared me to death. Left me speechless. Until my freshman year in high school. And we had a vocational agriculture teacher who was just out of college, became the instructor at the high school I attended. And unbeknownst to some of us, he had been a state public speaking champion. Unbeknownst to many of us, we didn't even know there were such a thing as public speaking contests. But I recall one day toward the end of class, Mr. Watkins called out 6 names. And he said, I want to see all of you 6 of you immediately following class. And I'm thinking, I don't remember doing anything wrong during class, but I'll stick around. And he says, here's the thing. I'm selecting you 6 to be entered in a speech contest in 2.5 months. And I'm sitting there going, yeah, right. He says, here's what you need to know. Your speech must be roughly 7.5 to 10 minutes. There will be no manuscript in front of you. In other words, it better be memorized verbatim. And then at the conclusion of that speech, the 3 judges who are in the room will have 7 to 10 minutes to ask you any questions they desire to ask you regarding that particular subject that you spoke on. I went home and remember telling my mom and dad it's the worst day of school I've ever had in my life. But nevertheless, we went to work. And the appointed time came, and the way the competition worked, the judges were in a classroom at a school by themselves, and you would go in and you would hand each judge a copy of your manuscript, and then you would get up behind the podium, and you would give your speech, and at the conclusion they would then ask you questions. And I remember handing out my speech and getting up behind the podium, and I think I got 3 words out of my mouth. I got nothing after those 3 words. Well, a couple of the judges, taking pity on me, tried to give me the next few words. And as soon as they said them, I could say them. Until I'd said the last one they said, then I didn't have a clue what to say next. My point is, he challenged me. He saw something in me that I did not see in myself. And he says, we're going to do this. And we did. And by the time it was my senior year, I was being asked by other FFA individuals in the state to give their nominating speeches to state office at the state convention that was held in Gallagher-Iba Arena, Oklahoma State. Call out over here for Curtis and Cheryl. To a packed house, and to be able to stand on that platform and give a nominating speech for a friend of mine that I had met through speech contests was amazing. And some people rue the day that Mr. Watkins entered me in a speech contest, but that's another story for another time. The point is, the church is at its best when it challenges people to live up to their potential. To live up to their potential. You see, the church is at its best when it's seeking to show people an honorable and productive way to live, and then goes about equipping and encouraging them to do so. I don't know about you, but I find myself most often motivated by speakers and authors who are challenging me and others to live for more than the simple accumulation of possessions, or to live for more than the simple pursuit of pleasures. For me, it's most often those who challenge me to, according to Micah, do justice, love mercy, and walk humbly with my God, that have an influence on my decision making. Because those are the people that remind me of the most important things in life. The most important things in life, like relationships, integrity, justice, compassion. I enjoy listening to speakers and reading authors who can motivate me to pursue those kinds of things. Why? Because I think they're in keeping with the prophet Micah, who indicates that that's exactly what we're to do. A gentleman by the name of Howard Hendricks once said, "Nothing is more common than unfulfilled potential." And I believe he's right. Countless people just seem to simply be going through life, accepting mediocrity as the only reality. And because of that, there's little passion and or little hope for anything better in this life as individuals and as people. And I suppose the thing that saddens me the most is that rather than living, many people are simply existing, playing it safe in the smallness of their own world. You see, their problem is they can't envision a larger, better world. They can't envision a more abundant life, which, by the way, Jesus said he came that we might have. I think Nelson Mandela is possibly correct when he says, quote, "There is no passion to be found playing small, in settling for a life that is less than the one you are capable of living," end quote. In other words, I believe the church is at its best when it's being used by God to make people better, challenging them to live up to their God-given potential. That's what faith does. That's what faith does. And if you don't believe me, just ask Paul. Ask Peter, ask Andrew, ask James, ask John, ask Zacchaeus. Because you see, all of those are individuals who maximize their potential by being willing to give up in any given moment all that they were in order that they might receive all they could become. So yes, the church is at its best when it challenges people to live up to their potential. And finally, because in keeping with my education, there's 3 points to this sermon. Finally, the church is at its best when it forgives people who fail to live up to their potential and is willing to offer them another chance. Throughout its history, the world has always had a problem deciding what to do with imperfection. Do we ignore it, or do we cruelly condemn it? You go back and look at the history of the world. When it comes to imperfections, typically there has been no middle ground in the world. We either ignore it or we condemn it. And this is precisely where the church's voice needs to be heard, especially in this day and in this age. Because perhaps the church's greatest contribution to society and to the world is to offer another option to the discussion on what do we do with mistakes? What do we do when people fail? You see, our culture and our world need to know that it is possible for individuals to learn from mistakes. And not only is it possible for them to learn from mistakes, but it's also possible for them to change, to become better people. Let me ask you this, is there any better example than the prodigal son? Or the woman caught in adultery? Any better example than Simon Peter? Maybe one of his disciples. No, I never knew him. Oh, I think I know you. You're one of his followers. No, I don't know the man. And yet Jesus comes back to him and says what? Feed my sheep. Do you love me? Yes. Feed my sheep. Even the thief on the cross got a second chance. Today you'll be with me in paradise. You see, I think the church is at its best when it forgives people who fail to live up to their potential and is willing to offer them another chance. I also think this is a time when the church is at its best, and that is when it shares hope with those who feel hopeless, when it's willing to share compassion with those who are hurting, when it's willing to be a listening ear for those who cannot seem to find their voice or anyone else who might pay attention. I share these things because this is what the church was designed and commissioned to do. Designed and commissioned to do by none other than our Lord and Savior Jesus Christ Himself. As we celebrate 130 years, may God continue to use us and this church in making a difference in the lives of people and making a difference in His Word.